Paper 3, Issues and Debates. Here you can see this is a specification for issues and debates. Paper 3, 24 marks. We are looking at exactly that. What are some key issues that psychologists will face, and what are the debates? Two debates that we tend to look at is gender and culture bias. We've spoken about that a lot throughout the 2 years. And the debates are kind of weighing up between two things. For instance, free will and determinism, nature versus nurture, holism versus reductionism, and ideographic and nomothetic. Ethical implications at the bottom is kind of like it is a debate to have. Should we be protecting our participants, protecting ourselves? But we split it into those two, issues and debates. Now, issues and debates are a really helpful section to have, and we do it last because we can then tie in everything we've looked at throughout the course. So like first thing you think of when I say gender bias is, any research in social influence. They're either focused on men or they're focused on women. So it's important for psychologists to discover and consider these different issues that they might have, and what can we do about that? The debate, is different psychologists have different views. So here, if in doubt, grenade. Now, paper 3, yes, issues and debates is in paper 3, but you should be including issues and debates throughout all 3 papers. It is the most helpful evaluation if you have forgotten anything specific. So if you get into an exam and you're trying to think of an AO3 for, Ash's research, grenade is our acronym for each of the different issues and debates. So you're in there, you think, oh, Ash, 123 American men. Okay, I can talk about gender bias, AO3. Or I can talk about culture bias, or ethical issues. Is it deterministic? So we are applying our issues and debates throughout all 3 papers, and then it has its own section in paper 3. It's the first section that you do, and that's 24 marks as well. So if we delve into gender bias today then, is it justifiable for a theory to be based on male behaviour and then applied to everybody else? Now, this is what we tend to see in psychology. A lot of our samples are just men, young American middle-class men. So really, we should be striving for universality, where an underlying characteristic of human beings is capable of being applied despite differences of experience and upbringing. So we're aiming for universality. It will take a while to get there, to not just apply it from one sex to another. We should look at each group and individual on a case-by-case viewpoint. So our situation here, we've got sexual behaviour that we're looking at in men and women. We've got Barbie and Ken. They've come into the psychologist's office. Ken goes out on the weekend. He's having a string of one-night stands. Barbie staying at home, babysitting her nieces and nephews. Very stereotypical behaviour. How is the psychologist going to view this? Well, they might view that as this is what stereotypically men do based on research from various different psychologists. But then we have, in an interview with Barbie, discovers Barbie's friend Cindy, like Ken, goes out most weekends in the pursuit of a male friend. What would the psychologist say about this? Well, they're going to be like, okay, well, for Ken, it's evolutionary. He's passing on his genes, next generation, blah, blah, blah. Cindy, they may call her promiscuous, not going against female nature of being a mother. And this is an example of alpha bias. Okay, so it's a key AO1 term when we talk about gender bias. Alpha bias is exaggerating the differences, and we are heightening the value of women, or we devalue them. So essentially what will happen is what we know about men, we will apply to women, but they are exaggerating how the differences between them. So to heighten the value of the woman or to devalue. In this case, we're seeing alpha bias because Cindy's being devalued compared to Ken. So we have lots of different areas within the psychological modules that we have studied. And in your questions for issues and debates, which we'll look at, they will ask you to refer to studies or theories throughout the course. So describe and evaluate gender bias in psychological research, refer to one or more areas of study. You can then bring in Freud, any of Freud to be fair, psychosexual stages. In forensics, women have weaker superegos, therefore women are inferior to men, all showing alpha bias. Two other key terms is androcentric. Now we've spoken about this already, we have mentioned it, we looked at gender. Centered or focused on men, neglecting or excluding women, and alpha and beta bias are the consequences of this. So when researchers apply what they know about men to women, alpha and beta bias will then happen because of that. So if alpha is exaggerating, beta is minimizing the differences between them. Theories might ignore questions about the lives of women or assume insights from research on men equally applies. A key area here, we go back to biopsychology, a lot of research into fight or flight tends to be on men, and then it's applied to women to assume that they would act in the same way. So we're seeing some beta bias there. Moving into AO3. So AO3 for issues and debates, they are very specific. So as well as referring to areas of the course, you will have to evaluate the concept of gender bias. So 3 here that I think are quite easy to remember. Institutional sexism, this is basically at the heart of any institution. We may see sexist attitudes. Men are predominant, they dominate at senior researcher level. You know, a lot of the course in psychology is male psychologists, therefore female concerns might be ignored or marginalised. Use of standardised procedures, again, because of a lot of the research being on men, it's going to minimise how men and women respond differently to a situation. If we think, for example, Ash's research, all men into conformity, women might have acted differently towards the Confederate. So could create artificial differences or mask real ones. And then the dissemination of research results is talking about, we have a publication bias, we think back to research methods, towards positive results. So research that finds gender differences, they are more likely to get published than those that don't. So then we are showing the extent or exaggerating the extent of gender differences. So a bit of publication bias. So a full marker here, briefly outline one problem with alpha bias. In psychological research, you need to link it to something that we've looked at, and one problem associated with beta bias in psychological research. So you can pause that and have a go. And then what they would look for here is you're saying about how what is alpha bias, what is beta bias, and then applying that to something in research. Freud is a good one to go to, and anything to do with social influence. What you have here that I will finish each of the debates and issues with is a plan for a question in that area. So it looked like this: discuss gender bias in psychology, refer to 2 topics you have discussed. So your content is talking about those keywords that we mentioned. Your AO3 is again what we've just discussed. Part of your AO3 will come from these examples. So tying your AO3 2 studies will get you those 10 marks. Okay, and that is gender bias.